Tonight, Buncefield and the burning questions.
Why did it happen? Stop it happening. Don't let anybody else have to go through what all of us here are going through.
The safety checks that gave this plant the all clear.
It was simply the accident which couldn't happen. It was the Titanic sailing without lifeboats because it couldn't sink.
And living among the ruins, the residents left to pick up the pieces.
What was it worth then?
Just under £600,000.
And now?
And now we've taken some advice and probably about half of that now.
Good evening. It's now 2 months since an explosion measuring 2.4 on the Richter scale ripped through the Buncefield oil depot in Hertfordshire. Houses, cars and businesses were destroyed, and thousands of local people were evacuated. But despite the damage, no one has yet accepted the blame or explained why the blast happened. Meanwhile, the residents who lived in the shadow of the plant are facing pollution concerns, health fears and plummeting property prices. So what does the future hold for them? And what are the chances of a similar industrial disaster occurring near you? Michael Nicholson reports.
"5:55 a.m., December the 11th, and Britain is about to experience its biggest explosion since World War II.
Battling the blazing inferno, the Titanic struggled to bring the Hertfordshire oil fire under control. More than 150 firefighters are still battling the flames. We get the latest from our correspondent.
The Buncefield blast spread panic through much of the southeast as the spiralling black clouds containing who knows what darkened the skies for miles around. Amazingly, no one was killed, but an entire community was left on the critical list. Wartime Bosnia, Beirut, Baghdad, try Hemel Hempstead. That Sunday morning, the explosions and the fires that followed wrecked property and people's lives. It took 60 hours to put out the fires, 2,000 people evacuated. 2 months on now, and some families are still waiting to go home. This is the home of Heidi Brazier, her husband Carl, and their 7 children. The blast cracked the walls, the ceilings, and blew out the windows.
This is Jacob's room, is it?
Yeah, this is Jacob's, yeah.
I can't see much damage here.
His window in the blast was actually ripped open. He's blind, pulled out.
Oh, there are cracks, there's a crack there.
Yeah, there's all of these. These have got to be cut back to the brickwork and resin injected.
And where was the boy? Where was Jacob?
Here, his bed was here. He was asleep here.
But not now, not since that dreadful Sunday, because this is where Jacob and his 6 brothers and sisters sleep in hotel rooms, rooms paid for by the family's insurance company because they've had no help whatsoever from the Buncefield depot itself.
We've had nobody, and a lot of the residents around here, we all feel the same, you know, that we've had nobody come to us and say, you know, can we help you? What can we do? Are you okay? We've been ignored. There was the initial onset of help, which was from the local council, who were fabulous. But then that's it, we've forgotten nothing. And it surprises me because of the magnitude of, you know, what happened, that, you know, they would have bothered about the local residents, but they haven't.
For a while, it was great to have a home at the Holiday Inn, but the children now want to go home to be in their own bedrooms. It's also costing the Braziers. They have to pay for their own meals, and on top of that, Carl is losing earnings because he has to take time off with the children and watch over house repairs.
There's only so much time you can take off, and every day he takes off, he loses overtime, so therefore, yes, it is a financial implication on it, and it's not just us. Why should we foot the bill for all these things, you know, when it wasn't our fault?
Bill Berger's house is only 800 yards from the blast site. There's nothing in between but open space. And it's a miracle that he and his family escaped unhurt. Astonishing that the house is even standing.
Yeah, so all of these were obviously blown out slightly. They're hanging off on by a thread, really. You can see all of they're not particularly securely in there now. And that one was completely blown out. As you can see, that's boarded up.
The flames were so close, so threatening, the family had to flee in their night clothes. Bill says his children are still too frightened to return. Not that they'll be able to live here, even if they did.
But yeah, there's this sort of rumbling which woke us up initially for about a second, and then the massive explosion, and it just rocked the whole house. I mean, we were shaking in bed, and then a moment later the ceiling just fell down on top of us. And there was orange flame kind of all around us. It felt like, you know, because it was obviously coming in, reflecting around.
And then all this came down?
It all came crashing down on us.
His wife Emma told me that Bill had time and again complained to the depot about fuel vapour in the air. She said that sometimes it was so overpowering they couldn't go into the garden. So bad, they'd even considered selling up. But on that December morning, that depot truly became a neighbour from hell.
You had it valued before Christmas, before this happened. What was it worth then? Can I ask you?
Yeah, it was just under £600,000.
And now?
The house. Now we've taken some advice, and probably about half of that now.
So you've lost, in effect, because of all this, something like £300,000, which, like most of us, is a kind of long-term investment for the kids, isn't it, the house?
Well, of course, yeah. Yeah, I mean, everybody invests in their house, don't they? And that's one of the things that you've got, that's the only valuable thing you've got, pretty much. And to see the value cut in half is that's devastating.
It's not surprising that some house values have been halved. Even with knockdown prices, how many of us would want to buy with Buncefield on our doorstep?
The key factor in selling is confidence. The memory of the blast will create a bruise which will linger for some time. That might diminish, but lenders might remain cautious.
The mortgage companies?
Yes.
Not willing to pay money for a house that's so close?
Well, they'll certainly look at it twice.
Yeah.
What we don't know is what might have happened under the surface with regard to all of the pipes that run around there and things like that. Close to the impact, for example, the ground shook mightily. There was spillage and floods, and presumably that was above water mains and things like that. Yeah. So these might not go ahead in future without an environmental search. And that can only be done when the environment has been searched.
So these people really do have a problem.
It looks like it.
Alone, they can't do much, if anything, to get compensation, but together, well, then they stand a much better chance. That's why around 200 residents have joined forces against the depot's co-owners, Total and Texaco, and are now suing them.
There's a huge range of uninsured losses which these people have suffered. If your property was worth $500,000 and is now worth on the open market $300,000, you've lost £200,000. No insurance company is going to help you there. It must be down to the oil companies.
Lynn Presence is one of the group. Her house is only 500 yards from the blast, and it's so badly damaged, she wonders if she'll ever be able to sell it.
We have had an estate agent come round and look at our property, and he has told us that we've lost probably up to half the value of the property, which is, you know, this is our pension, this is our home. We love living here, but he was saying that, you know, you would need to ask yourself who would want to live 500 yards away from Buncefield Depot, and even if they did, would they be able to get a mortgage on the property, you know, if we did want to sell it.
And she's worried that some of the damage may remain hidden for some time.
I've got some real concerns with particularly the water supply and not knowing really if that is safe. With the gas, we've had problems with the heating, we've had power failures, we've had no phone lines. We've also got probably about 25 huge trees bordering the garden. They must be 35 foot high, and my concern is that they may well have been dislodged, and if they come down, they'll be on the house.
Drinking water could be another problem. Even now, the water company is still testing supplies here to make sure it's safe.
How many of these tests do you take then?
Normally we take these 4 bottles, which are just sort of routine tests.
So no problems so far, but there are concerns that in the long term, pollution from Buncefield could trickle down through the soil and contaminate the water table. But there's a more immediate problem. What to do with over 3 million gallons of water and foam that was used to fight the blaze. It's now lying in storage tanks contaminated with deadly toxic chemicals. Right now, that firewater is safely stored at this Hertfordshire sewage farm, but over 3 million gallons of it, it's an expensive problem.
The options for disposing of the firewater, firstly, is treatment through this facility if we are allowed to do that by the Environment Agency and other authorities. Alternatives are incineration at high temperatures or pre-treatment in a specialist waste treatment centre. In cases like this, the polluter pays. In that case, we are working very, very closely with the oil companies, and we shall be recovering all the costs associated with this recovery operation.
So, if the oil companies can pay for the clean-up costs of contaminated water, why, ask local residents, can't they pay towards their own losses?
I understand that the oil company are now putting some money in to pay for the clear-up operation that's in progress at Buncefield. I just feel that they should be now talking to us as well. We don't really know for sure what structural damage has been done to the house when it's been shaken the way that it has. And so far the only help we've had from the oil company is directing us to a helpline which has told us to contact our own home insurance company.
This building over here, which has been pretty much trashed, is still on fire.
The government's health and safety executive are beginning their investigation into the blast to answer the questions we're all asking. How did it happen? Could it have been prevented? Experts like risk consultant Tony Cox have their theories, but he says in a lifetime working in the oil industry, he finds it hard to explain how so much fuel vapour could have escaped.
You don't get an explosion that can be heard 50 miles away without having had an absolutely enormous quantity of vapour somehow involved in that particular explosion. The Buncefield explosion was a completely staggering event to me as a professional risk analyst. It's the sort of thing that I believe has not happened before, and I think chances of it happening again, even if we did nothing, are extremely low.
But something like this has happened before. 5 years ago, in April 2001, here on Humberside, the ConocoPhillips oil refinery blew up, damaging buildings a half a mile away. The Health and Safety Executive's report revealed that the immediate cause was a corroded pipe, while the underlying problem was catastrophic management failure. Now, that same agency is carrying out the Buncefield investigation.
On the 24th of November, a little under 3 weeks before the explosion, the Health and Safety Executive gave the management of this depot the all clear. Now, what's causing so much anger is that that same executive has been given the sole responsibility of conducting its own inquiry into what went wrong here. There have been demands for a public inquiry, but the government said no.
So Buncefield was considered a safe oil storage depot, and yet large quantities of petrol vapour blew up. So what precautions were in place to prevent it happening?
There are fail-safe systems to deal with the sorts of fire scenarios that definitely I and others had foreseen. There would be firefighting equipment fixed in place, ready for such a fire, but there wouldn't have been anything that was fixed in place ready for a massive explosion.
The Health and Safety Executive told us the site operator is responsible for managing any risk they create. They considered a vapour cloud explosion as too unlikely to plan for. The executive denied giving the depot the all clear, as inspection was a sampling process. Independent experts will be involved in the investigation.
The Health and Safety Executive never, in my view, carried out proper or adequate risk assessments because they never believed that a vapour cloud could develop to the extent it did on that Sunday morning and cause this awful explosion. It was simply the accident which couldn't happen. It was the Titanic sailing without lifeboats because it couldn't sink.
They said it couldn't happen at Buncefield, but it did. So could it happen anywhere else? Britain has 16 major fuel depots, many near large, densely populated areas. Take a look, you might even be living near one. Buncefield was the 5th largest. Many of the others have been here since the 60s, with towns and cities growing up around them.
And I wonder whether, given that number, whether we are just a little complacent about the dangers they represent.
Well, I don't think we have been complacent, actually. For something like 30 years now, the UK has actually been a leader in developing very good policies for land use planning around that kind of installation, and has been rolling back the historical legacy of unfortunate juxtaposition between such sites and their neighbours. And
this hasn't happened in Buncefield. In fact, the perimeter has got closer and closer to the depot itself.
Well, yes, but Buncefield is not one of the most accident-prone types of installation. That's the thing that has been the surprising feature about Buncefield. It's not a place where one would have expected such a devastating explosion.
Of the scores of businesses that were destroyed here, how many will return? How many can be convinced it's safe to? The longer they wait, the more the local economy suffers.
We do have concerns about the outcome of the investigation and where businesses will be able to relocate. If large businesses move out of the area, the knock-on could be enormous. They employ, obviously, a lot of people who spend money in the local shops. They employ a lot of people within the supply chain, like printers, recruitment agencies, people that supply refreshments and so on and so forth. So it really is very, very important that we make sure that we do everything to make sure they stay here.
Now, you may well wonder why industrial estates have been built right next to such large fuel depots, but then some people don't have a choice of neighbours. Townsend Church of England High School was built 5 years before Buncefield. It's 3 miles away, but still suffered damage.
Well, there were 69 areas of damage in total. Some of those were relatively minor, and some were very significant. Whole ceilings down in the dining hall and in the music centre. Our boiler, we believe, was blown asunder by the blast.
What would have happened if the children had been here?
There would certainly have been some injuries because the ceilings came down in areas where children would have been. At the moment, the estimates for the total damage are about £160,000. £91,000 of that is replacement boilers, and so we're under some financial difficulty.
But wouldn't you have expected to hear from the oil companies?
I've not heard directly from the companies at all. We're using our insurers at the moment, hoping they're negotiating. But every day I go to my post thinking Total Oil will write to me and offer me some money to put this right, but it's not happened yet.
Which is surprising given what happened here in Toulouse in southern France. 5 years ago, this plant blew up, killing 30 people and injuring 2,500. Here, Total was the sole owner and paid £3 million to the families of the dead and injured, and within a few days of the blast. The Buncefield depot is run by 2 oil companies, Total and Texaco, though Total has the major share.
So what do you make of the continuing silence of the oil companies here? That silence is fast becoming a public relations fiasco. 8 weeks on now, and as the investigation gets underway, it does seem as if the multi-billion-pound oil giants seem prepared to let the victims of this disaster, the local residents, sort things out for themselves as best they can. And you may not think that's good enough.
Total and Texaco told us, we set up urgent assistance and insurance helplines and donated £150,000 to the Mayor's Fund as a goodwill gesture. We cannot discuss a settlement as the cause of fire and liability has not been determined.
They've said 2 things to the residents: sort it out with your own insurance company. If you've got any uninsured loss, don't look at us. But if you have any problems, there's £150,000 charity which you can apply for. Now, these people don't want charity. This isn't a Victorian mill owner distributing largesse at Christmas. They want compensation, and they're entitled to it.
You can see a gap where I believe the mortar or cement has actually moved and come down into the gutter.
Rachel Lampy's insurance company did what was expected of them, but while it can repair structural damage, she says emotional scars are harder to heal. She's suffered nightmares and panic attacks since the blast, and her children have been affected too.
That's the fire and the smoke, and there's a smoke spreading. This one is when the fire went, and you can see some bits of blue, and there's the sky, and that's the sky, the bits of blue.
They drew pictures of what they saw out of the bedroom window. We felt this would actually help them deal with their feelings of the situation that we had experienced. I would have expected to hear from Total or Texaco, the operators of the site. It was their site that exploded. After that explosion, we have had damages to our properties, and emotionally as well. It's been a very stressful time.
Stressful? Well, for those who've suffered here, that could be an understatement. It's a worrying time, too, for the oil industry executives, because for them, the future implications of Buncefield are huge.
Well, once we know what caused the accident at Buncefield, there are only really two possible futures. One is that we have to include that sort of scenario, a big explosion, in the land use planning provisions, and that would mean having to alter the land uses, either move the terminals or move their neighbours, which is something that has horrendous implications for the nation. Or we find technological fixes for making sure that the same accident scenario and all its close cousins, because there are a variety of other things that might happen, are eliminated.
Okay, let's go back 9 weeks, just before the explosion. And I come to you and I say, look, you're an expert in this field. You know all about the oil industry. You're a risk assessment specialist. I want to go and work in that office block. Now, it's only 300 yards away from that big oil depot. Is it safe to go in there? Your answer would be yes.
Yes.
And 3 weeks later, it would blow up.
Perfectly true. And I'm not alone. And that's quite true. And that's something that is stunning about Buncefield, and that's actually what all of us have to grapple with from here on.
In the meantime, for Heidi and her family, it's the start of another day, sharing hotel rooms.
Chloe. Can we go home today?
No, we can't go home today.
What?
We can't go home today.
The Braziers have lived happily here in Hemel Hempstead for 4 years. But now, like many others, they're wondering why houses were ever allowed to be built so close to something that turned out to be so dangerous.
You drive past it all the time. So many people have said since they've driven past it, and now they know what it is, but many times they've driven past it and thought, oh yes, whatever that is, but not actually realised. Initially, when it was built, there were some houses here, but we are very surprised the council has allowed so many houses to be built around it, knowing the size of it.
So now we wait to know what went wrong at Buncefield. But for those families awaiting compensation, indeed for all those thousands living by a similar installation, the answer can't come soon enough.
It needs to be prevented from happening again, and there are 4 other, refineries bigger than that around, and it's not a case of, we don't want it right in our backyard, put it somewhere else, but it's a case of, why did it happen? Stop it happening. Don't let it happen again. Don't let anybody else have to go through what all of us here are going through.
Michael Nicholson reporting. And that's nearly all for tonight. Coming up on Friday, are we ready to shop around the clock? As the big supermarkets launch a campaign to end the restrictions on Sunday trading, we look at how the current law has become increasingly ineffective. And if those companies do get their way, will it finally mean the death of the traditional corner shop? And you can see that report on Friday night at 8 o'clock. Until then, from all of us here, goodbye and thank you for joining us.
Exactly according